Hello, this is the second video to Introduction to Differentiation, or also finding the derivative of a function. So, as you might recall, the definition of a derivative is this that I have written right here. It's limit of as delta x approaches 0 of f of x plus delta x minus f of x over delta x. So, if you are not sure of what this means, this is just basically the limit as your change in y and your change in x becomes smaller and smaller and smaller, close to 0, and it's just the slope, so delta y over delta x. And you can work through the procedure I showed in the previous video on how to go from this basic formula right here that maybe with a little bit of thinking you could have gotten into this slightly more complicated definition. So now let's work on an example, see how this works in a very basic form. So let's say that we say that f of x is equal to x squared. Let's try to find the derivative. So let's first define that f of x plus delta x. So remember that this means that wherever you see an x, you will substitute it with x plus delta x. We can just say x1 so we don't get confused whatever x is. So instead of having x squared, we have x1 plus delta x1 squared, and then just f of x1 is equal to x1 squared. And so delta x is just delta x1. Very well, now we can distribute, so we have x1 plus delta x1 squared, and we can just expand this into x1 squared plus 2x1 times delta x1 plus delta x1 squared. And we have this minus x1 squared over delta x1. So this is just plugging in the values for f of x plus delta x, f of x, and delta x. And so we can just cancel out some of the terms. For instance, we can cancel out x1 squared and negative x1 squared. And now we just divide our numerator by our denominator, which is it's very easy. So we get 2x1 plus delta x. But now remember that we had the limit as delta x approaches 0. So we can think of delta x as being 0 since we're taking the limit as it approaches 0. And so we're left with f prime of x, x1 to be 2x1, and we can just generalize to f prime of x equals 2x. And you can just actually plug it into a calculator, find the derivative of x squared, and you will find that the derivative of x squared is actually 2x, which is consistent with what we found. So that is how you use our very basic definition of a derivative, but it's the right definition of a derivative, to find the derivative. However, there are some tricks that you will learn later on which will make finding the derivative of a function very easy, and you don't have to go through this process.